Hey everyone, we're going to build off the last two videos here, and what we're going to be covering is a little more in depth on the HTML side, as well as we're going to look at linking a CSS style sheet to this page. And what that really means is we're going to be allowed to add visual elements to this HTML rather than just the plain text view that you see here. So before we begin, I just wanted to highlight just kind of some general things here. First things you see the file we have open that we've been working on is the index.html file. You'll notice that there's an asterisk beside it, and this really only needs to be said once and you'll get it. That means you've modified this file and it hasn't been saved yet. So it's just giving a quick indicator that, hey, if you're not seeing any updates when you're looking at this potentially in a live view or anything like that, you need to save it first, and just to do that is really just a quick key of Control S, and then you can see the asterisk goes away and it's letting you know you're looking at the most up-to-date and recent saved version of this. Moving on. What we're going to be doing now is building a style.css file, and this is going to be an external file that you can call on any page to automatically add design elements to your HTML. So how we go about doing this is pretty similar to how we made the index page previously. Rather than pressing on the site, we are going to right click on the CSS folder and we're going to press New File. Let's delete all of that text because it's not going to be an HTML file, it's going to be a .css file. And what we do there is just type in style.css and press enter or click away and you'll see that it's saved. So just for context, even though that this is in the same site folder, it doesn't mean any of this information is linked together. We need to declare that in the HTML file by creating a link, not a hyperlink, but a link relation between the index, the HTML page, and the style page. So the way we do that, just inside of your head tag, below the third line, press enter. We have an empty space there. Type in link, because we're going to be creating a link between a style sheet, and press tab. And you can see it nicely types out all of that. We're making a link and a relation as a style sheet. And the hyperlink reference, href, just means linked to a file, is going to be not style.css, if that's what you're wondering, because that would mean it's literally in the site folder. What we need to do is say it's in the CSS folder, like that. And you can see Dreamweaver's added some nice features these days where it's going to actually say, well, maybe this is what you're looking for because that's the file that's in there. You can save yourself some time by typing it and just click that. And let's just clean this indent up right there. And now you have created a relation between the index page and the style.css page. So before we move forward, let's make sure we remember to press Control S to save. And now we're going to open up this style page. So go ahead and double click it. And to save us some confusion rather than having to toggle back and forth here, let's just pull it out. And we're going to just nest it nicely right here. So we can work with both the HTML, the CSS, and the live view of information here. So I'm going to visit a section that's pretty important to remember now, and it's kind of the syntax or anatomy of code. So looking here, you can see all of these bracketed items. Those are tags. You have the body tag, you have the header tag, you have the section tag. But within those tags, you can have unique coding elements that would be outside of just the container that they're in. So to give an example of that, let's just open up our section. We'll do one more just to get inside of there. And we're going to type in div. And this is probably one of the most common tags you'll see in any website. And it's just basically a container that can do almost any CSS to it. So it's very robust. And just so you know, out of curiosity, there are many HTML tags that have specific rules against them that don't allow you to apply all types of CSS to them. Specifically things like spans are more difficult to work with, so we're going to work with more generalized tags. So going off of what I was saying here, going back to how you can apply different elements to tags, if we type period, This is how you make a quick command for a class. And a class is a unique design or styling element that allows you to apply CSS on top of the section. So I'm just going to go call this example just to give you some context here. And you can see now we have div class example. Go ahead and press enter, and I just want to give context here. We're going to type div again. So now we have a div here and a div there. I'm going to type in 2 here and 1 there. And I'm going to show you how the difference between applying a tag CSS rule and a class CSS rule work. So inside of here now we can declare styling rules with the tags and classes inside of our HTML page, and that's because again we have the link relation here. To make things easy, let's start off with the tag. And to do this is quite simple. We just call what we've named. So div. What we need to do is wrap this in curly brackets like so, which basically just defines every rule inside of these curly brackets is assigned to div. So let's just press enter. And just to give simple context for this one, a very common one you'll use is font dash size. So you can see font size here, and as you've guessed, that can change the size of the text. So just to give yourself some visual context for this, let's do 40 pixels. Press Control S, and Dreamweaver's, in my opinion, is probably not the best text editor, so there's going to be some finickiness to this. A lot of other text editors, in my opinion, are easier to use, but to get this to update, you just have to click the index page, and then we'll make sure we've saved that for one, and click the style page again. So you just have to click on and off to get your updates. And you can see both divs now have size 40 font to them. So you can see a tag CSS rule will apply to every single tag on that page. It's basically a quick useful one if you want to have one that's generalized across all tags, but it can be quite difficult if you want to apply unique rules. And this is where the idea of applying a class or an ID tag, which we'll get to next, has some value. So if you remember here on the HTML side, we typed in div dot to define a class. It's the same way you define it in the CSS. So we just type in dot example, referencing back we have a class here, example, and same process, but now we're saying only for that particular class. We're going to wrap this in curly brackets. There's no tricks with that. It's always wrapped unless you're using other technologies like Sass or less, but we won't be covering that for this course, just things you should look if you're ever curious to learn more. And what we're going to do is apply a rule unique to this one now. So another easy one, color. That's defining the color of the font. And you can use hash codes, or you can use the color picker, which is a pretty easy tool. And you can look for the specific color you want. Just to give some nice contrast, I'm going to click the hash code here for this. We're going to go ahead and save. We're going to click on and off again. And you can see now that this is the only text that changed color, because example is only assigned to the class here. This is where this can get really useful. Say we want to create another object, or another tag rather, that possesses similar elements that we just made. Well, if we type in div dot example, press tab again to call that out, and we type in some text there, you can see that this div is already pre-rendered with the div CSS styling and the class CSS styling. And it's pretty easy to work with this too. So say for example you wanted to have the 40 pixel font, but only in the example class, you would just cut that out, Control X quick key, add a semicolon here, because you have to add the semicolon to the end of any CSS rule if you want to apply a second one. We'll just clean up some of that format. And it's probably a good thing to keep in mind whenever you finish, just add a semicolon there. We press save, click off and on again, and now you can see the div tag has no styling elements. The example class maintains this, and the last one that we're going to cover is an ID. And IDs are typically used to define a unique element, and they're very useful when you want to utilize HTML with JavaScript, because that's where you can define unique calls or functions. But all the same, it still has the same design benefits to this. So this is how you do a tag, and a ID, and it's just a hashtag. So if we do div hashtag, and then we'll just call this example2, you can see now we have an ID class for that. I'm just going to type 4 here, and I'm just going to emphasize one other thing too here is you don't really have to have one or the other. You can have both. So for example, if we do div dot example hashtag example2, you can have a class and an ID. And although you're not supposed to assign more than one ID to an object, you can. It's just not necessarily the best practice. So just to remember, IDs are typically meant for unique styling or unique features of code. Classes are generally the best way to go about it, but every now and then you may need to use them more than once. So here's some context for that now. We have a div with no elements. We have a class with a few. Now we can apply a ID rule. It's the same process, however, you call it by using the hashtag, similar to how we wrote it here in the code. And we're just going to write it out, example2, make our brackets, and now you can see we're calling the specific tag here. Now, why don't we do one that's a little more obvious compared to the others? Text align, which, if any of you are familiar with Microsoft Word, it's basically left, right, justify, or center. So we're going to align it center. We're going to add that semicolon that we talked about. We're going to save, click here and back, and now you can see that example2 for 4 is in the center. And if we put some text now where there's example class and ID example2, you'll see that it possesses both the ID and tag elements. So for the next video, what we're going to do is remove some of our examples here, but we're going to work off of this same theme of how we can apply classes and IDs and really start building out a meaningful layout with the HTML as well as the CSS that we've covered in this video.